Picture the scene. One of the wealthiest people on the planet, standing in front of some of the most talented students in the world at one of the most prestigious universities in history. And they are all waiting for the same thing, that the future belongs to them, that they have what it takes, that the road ahead, though difficult, leads somewhere worth the effort. Instead, he looked out at the room and told them he hoped they would suffer. Not that they would succeed, not that the world would reward their talent, that they would suffer. This man built the most valuable company on earth, started it with $40,000 and 2 friends in a diner booth, ran it for over 30 years, and his parting advice to the next generation of leaders was to go out and suffer. To understand why a man like that would say a thing like that, we need to go back to a Denny's in San Jose, California. 1993, a 30-year-old sitting in a booth. No business plan that made sense, no certainty about anything, just a conviction that had, by most reasonable estimates, about 0% chance of working out. This is where it started. Jensen Huang was born in Tainan, Taiwan, in 1963. His family moved to Thailand when he was small, and when he was 9 years old, his parents made a decision that will sound remarkable to almost anyone who hears it. They put Jensen and his older brother on a plane to America. Not to a city, not to somewhere familiar, to relatives in rural Kentucky, where, because of a misunderstanding the family could not have seen coming, both boys ended up enrolled in a reform school, a school for troubled teenagers. Jensen was 9 years old. He did not speak fluent English. He was the only Asian student in the building, and the bullying started quickly. Most people, when they tell this part of Jensen's story, focus on the hardship, but Jensen has never described it that way. What he took from those years was something more useful than sympathy. He learned what it actually felt like to have nothing, to start from zero, to survive inside a system that was not designed for you, that had no particular interest in your success, and that offered nothing in the way of reassurance. He eventually moved to Portland, Oregon, got into high school, and at 15 years old, walked into a Denny's and got a job washing dishes. He has talked about that job with more genuine pride than most people talk about their biggest achievements. "I planned my work," he said once. "I was organized. I washed the living daylights out of those dishes." From dishwasher, he worked his way to Oregon State University, electrical engineering, then a master's degree at Stanford, then a role at AMD, then LSI Logic. And then in 1992, 2 colleagues asked him a question that changed the direction of everything. Their names were Chris Malachowski and Curtis Preem, both engineers at Sun Microsystems. They told Jensen they wanted to start a company. They just needed him to help figure out what it should be. So the 3 of them started meeting at a Denny's in East San Jose, the same restaurant chain where Jensen used to clear plates as a teenager. Now the setting for what, in hindsight, would become the most important company in the history of computing. With $40,000 between them, and a shared belief that personal computers were going to need dedicated hardware for 3-dimensional graphics, NVIDIA was incorporated on April 5, 1993. Jensen was 30 years old. He had never run a company before. He later admitted, with complete honesty, that none of the 3 of them had any real idea what they were doing. And that, it turns out, was one of the most important things they had going for them. Here is the thing. Almost everything written about Jensen Huang focuses on what he built: the chips, the AI revolution, the trillion-dollar valuation. But almost nobody has looked carefully at how his mind actually works. The 3 specific principles he has been running on for 30 years. Principles that directly contradict what most of us have been taught our entire lives about how success is supposed to happen. 2 of those principles, if you told them to most people without context, they would tell you were wrong. They are not wrong. The first 3 years of NVIDIA nearly ended the whole thing before it had a chance to matter. Their first chip, the NV1, was built on a fundamental mistake. NVIDIA had designed it using a graphics architecture based on quadrilateral shapes. The rest of the industry used triangles. And when Microsoft rolled out DirectX, a software standard that only supported triangles, NVIDIA's chip became incompatible with virtually every game being developed anywhere in the world. At the same time, they were deep into a major contract with Sega. The gaming company had hired NVIDIA to build the graphics processor for their next console. The contract was keeping NVIDIA alive, but the chip they were building was the same wrong architecture. Jensen looked at the situation clearly. If they finished the Sega chip, they would deliver something incompatible with every software standard in the industry. NVIDIA would survive the contract and die shortly after. If they walked away, they would lose the money, run out of runway, and die immediately. Either road led to the same destination. What Jensen did next defined NVIDIA's character for the next 30 years. He called a meeting with Sega's president, Shoichiro Irimajiri, and he told him the truth. NVIDIA could not build the chip they had promised. Sega needed to find another supplier. And then, Jensen asked to still be paid in full. He has described this moment as one of the most embarrassing of his life. He was asking a business partner to pay for work that hadn't been delivered. By any normal standard, it should not have worked. Irimajiri had met Jensen before. He believed in the person sitting across from him, and against every normal business instinct, he said yes. Sega invested $5 million into NVIDIA rather than walking away. His understanding and generosity, Jensen said years later, gave us 6 months to live. 6 months. Jensen used every dollar of that money to do something most leaders would not have had the stomach for. He laid off more than half the company, 100 people down to 40, scrapped every piece of work they had done, and pointed every remaining resource at a brand new chip that had to be finished in 9 months. They had 1 month of payroll left when the Riva 128 shipped in August of 1997. It sold 1 million units in 4 months. The company survived, but something else happened in that period that matters just as much. A phrase found its way into NVIDIA's culture. Jensen still uses it today with what he describes as genuine joy. Our company is 30 days from going out of business. Not as a warning, not as fear, as a practice, a deliberate daily refusal to feel comfortable. In 2024, Jensen Huang stood in front of a room of students at Stanford and said something that deserved far more attention than it got. One of my great advantages is that I have very low expectations. Read that again slowly. The man who survived 2 near bankruptcies, who held a single vision for 30 years, while an entire industry told him he was wrong. His great advantage was low expectations. He continued, people with very high expectations have very low resilience, and unfortunately, resilience matters in success. Here is what the whole success industry has been getting wrong. High expectations are not ambition. High expectations are fragility with better branding. Think about what happens when the road does not match what you expected, and it almost never does. The gap between what you expected and what you actually got becomes a story you tell yourself. Evidence that something has gone wrong. Evidence that maybe this is not for you. The gap does not just hurt, it means something. And that meaning is what breaks people. Jensen expected almost nothing from the road. He expected it to be brutal. He expected failure to show up regularly. And when those things happened, every single one of them, they were not evidence of anything. They were just Tuesday. But here is the distinction that makes this a philosophy rather than just pessimism. Low expectations about the road is not the same as low standards for the work. Jensen had uncompromising standards for the quality of the engineering, for the depth of the research, for the honesty of the culture. He demanded extraordinary things from himself and from everyone around him. He just did not expect the path toward those things to be comfortable. Most of us have these two things completely backwards. We have high expectations about how the journey will go, and honestly, lower standards than we would admit about the actual quality of what we produce day to day. Jensen inverted both. The tool you take from this: before your next major challenge, write down what you actually expect to happen, not what you hope for, what you genuinely believe is coming. Then ask, are these expectations higher than the difficulty probably deserves? Because if they are, you are not building resilience. You are building a trap. Reset the expectation down. Keep the standard up. Between 1997 and 2012, Jensen Huang spent 15 years building something that most of the people watching him could not understand. NVIDIA had survived. They went public in 1999. The company was building. But Jensen had a conviction that was running about a decade ahead of where the world could see. In 2006, NVIDIA launched CUDA, a computing platform that allowed their graphics chips to be used for any kind of parallel computing, not just video games. It was a massive investment, years of engineering, and for most of the years that followed, the downloads were declining. The market had not arrived. From 2007 to 2015, NVIDIA's stock went essentially nowhere. Jensen kept talking about artificial intelligence at conferences, and the people listening thought, as one commentator later wrote, that he sounded like someone who did not quite understand how businesses were supposed to work. He kept building anyway. 15 years. During those wilderness years, Jensen was asked in an interview about NVIDIA's competitive position. What was the market share strategy? His answer stopped the conversation cold. We never talk about market share in our company. Not rarely, not occasionally. Never. The whole concept of market share says there are a whole bunch of other people doing the same thing. And if they are doing the same thing, why are we doing it? Every business school on the planet starts here. Competitive analysis, market positioning, know your rivals, track your share. Jensen banned the entire concept from his company's vocabulary. Not because competition does not exist, because the moment you start measuring your ceiling against what your competitors have already built, you have accepted their ceiling as your reference point. You stop imagining what does not exist yet. You start optimizing for a slightly better version of what already does. You are, by definition, running their race. CUDA was built for a market that had no revenue, no established customer base, no clear proof it would ever matter commercially. No company with a market share mindset would have invested what NVIDIA invested in it. The market did not exist. There was nothing to measure share against. And because there was nothing to measure, nobody else entered. NVIDIA built the infrastructure for the AI revolution in a space so early and so undefined that by the time the market arrived, they were already so far ahead, the gap was almost impossible to close. The tool you take from this: find the one place in your work where you are currently defining your ceiling by what someone else has already built. Then ask what you would build if you genuinely stopped looking at them. Start there. October 2012. Florence, Italy. A graduate student named Alex Krzyzewski walked to the front of a packed computer vision conference and presented results that nobody in that room was ready for. Krzyzewski had been working in the lab of Geoffrey Hinton at the University of Toronto. Hinton was one of the most important figures in the entire history of neural network research, a man who had spent decades arguing that machines could learn to see the world the way humans do, while most of his colleagues thought he was wasting his time. Together with a fellow student named Ilya Sutskever, Krzyzewski had built a deep learning neural network, AlexNet, trained on over 1 million images. And when it entered the ImageNet competition, it beat the second best result by 10 percentage points, In a competition where improvements of 1 or 2 points were considered significant, the researcher who ran the competition described her reaction as near disbelief. And here is the detail that completes everything we have been building toward. AlexNet was trained using 2 NVIDIA graphics chips, running CUDA. The same platform Jensen had spent 6 years building for a market that did not exist. The same platform that skeptics had questioned for nearly a decade. The same platform that had barely moved NVIDIA's stock for years. In one afternoon, in a conference room in Florence, 15 years of building in the dark became the most important infrastructure on Earth. Not because Jensen had predicted this exact moment, because for 15 years he had refused to define his ceiling by what anyone else was building. And so he was in a space so early, so alone, so far from anyone else's competitive map, that when the world arrived, only NVIDIA was there to meet it. After Florence, the world understood what NVIDIA had. Every major technology company began competing for NVIDIA's chips. And Jensen Huang, now at the center of the most important technological shift in a generation, kept saying something that confused people. He kept saying that intelligence was not what he valued most. At Caltech's graduation ceremony in 2024, in front of some of the most academically gifted students in the world, he said this: "Of all the things that I value, intelligence is not at the top of that list. My ability to endure pain and suffering, to work on something for a very, very long period of time, to handle setbacks, and to see the opportunity just around the corner. I consider those to be my superpowers. The man who built the most technically complex company in the history of computing, he does not put intelligence at the top. He puts endurance." And then he talked about the ability to forget, to let the last moment go, whether it was a crushing loss or a major win, and come back to zero. So long as you love the work that you do, you will be able to keep on carrying on. The people who freeze after a failure are not weak. They are carrying the weight of it every day. The people who play it safe after a success are not lazy. They are protecting what they finally earned, and that protection makes them smaller than they were before they had it. Jensen built a deliberate practice, not occasional, not aspirational, but daily and structural, to set both things down and come back to zero. Because zero is where the next thing gets built. The tool you take from this: at the end of your working day, 2 minutes. Let the best thing that happened today go, not because it does not matter, because carrying it makes you protective. Let the worst thing go, not because it does not hurt, because carrying it makes you cautious. Come back to zero. The weight of yesterday is the thing that makes tomorrow smaller than it has to be. By 2026, NVIDIA is worth more than $3 trillion. Jensen Huang is one of the 10 wealthiest people alive. The man who once had to ask a Sega executive to pay for a chip he couldn't deliver is now the person that the most powerful figures in technology travel across the world to meet. He still wears the black leather jacket, still thinks out loud in every meeting, still believes NVIDIA could be 30 days from going out of business. Not because the company is fragile, because that belief is the practice. If the way this video has broken down how Jensen Huang actually thinks is the kind of content you want more of, this channel is built for exactly that. Every video, one legend, the operating system underneath the story. The subscribe button is there when you are ready. In October 2023, Jensen sat down for a long conversation on a podcast called Acquired. They talked for hours. The founding, the near bankruptcies, the 15 years of building CUDA before anyone understood what it was, the moment in Florence when everything changed. And toward the end, they asked him one question. If you could go back, knowing everything you know now, sitting in that Denny's booth again in 1993, would you start NVIDIA? I wouldn't do it. Probably not. I would think carefully about it. not it depends. I wouldn't do it. Building NVIDIA turned out to have been 1,000,000 times harder than I expected it to be, than any of us expected it to be. If I take all of my knowledge now, and I go back, and I say I'm going to endure that whole journey again, I think it's too much. It is just too much. The 3 principles we just decoded, the low expectations, the refusal to track competitors, the bet on endurance over intelligence. They were not clever strategies he designed in a boardroom. They were the only things that made an unbearable 30-year journey survivable. He built it anyway, every single day, for 30 years, without a guarantee, without a visible market, without money more than once. From a reform school in Kentucky where no one expected anything from him, from a sink full of dishes in a Portland Denny's, from a booth in San Jose with 2 friends and a conviction that had approximately 0% chance of working out. He would not do it again. He did it anyway. And that is not a contradiction. That is the whole point. 3 tools from the operating system of Jensen Huang. The expectations inversion. Before your next major challenge, reset your expectations of the road down to match its actual difficulty. Keep your standards for the work as high as they have ever been. That gap between those 2 things is precisely where resilience gets built. Most people have them the wrong way around their entire careers. The market share ban. Find the one place in your work where you are defining your ceiling by what someone else has already built. Ask what you would build if you genuinely stopped looking at them. Start building that. The endurance inventory. Write down the 3 things you have been working on the longest, without visible results. That list is not evidence of failure. The people who would have stopped have already stopped. You are competing against a smaller field than you think. Stay. He built the most valuable company in the world, not on genius, not on a perfect plan, on the willingness to expect nothing from the road, to build for markets that did not exist yet, and to stay in the room long after it stopped being comfortable. That is not a story about one exceptional person. It is a blueprint. And now you have it. There is a pattern underneath every legend this channel will decode. Not the success, not the wealth, not the product they built or the company they ran. Something quieter than all of that. Something most people walk right past when they read the story. The next video finds it in someone completely different. A different era, a different world, but underneath, the same pattern. That one is waiting for you. That is one legend, decoded. The next one is waiting.